Alrighty, well, good. Well, it's just turned good afternoon for me here in Melbourne, but I know it could be anywhere, anytime, anywhere in the world at the moment. Welcome to Ace Marks the Spot. We've got Noops back again for another week of fun and games. Thanks for joining us again, Noops. How are you traveling?
It's wonderful. It's a glorious day here. It's about 8:30 in Philadelphia. Had a fun day of betting tennis, just women's tennis today, which is just the best. I don't have to hear about any silly men's nonsense. So I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. This must be your favorite week of the year when there's just, waiting for Davis Cup and there's not a whole lot of men's tennis on the card. Does that sound about right?
It's really lovely. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's one of those weeks I
It's
really
up there.
enjoy because now everyone's talking about women's tennis. I got all these people that are like, I only bet men's tennis. Man. The WTA is too weird. Man. This week, they're all sitting there. They got the itch. They got to scratch it. They got to do something. So I'm getting a lot of questions from people, which is fun. Any week there's women's tennis is a good week.
Yep, very, very good. Now, obviously, this is our second week doing this, and hopefully we can make it a little bit more of a regular thing if possible. Obviously, we're not sponsored by anything at the moment, and, I don't really like it when people start to do, shameful product placements and these kind of things. So we
Never.
might just,
We would never
we might
stoop to that.
never at all. Why would we? But what we might do is we might get straight into the action, and we're going to do things a little bit differently today. But we might just start with what caught your eye last week. Is there anything in particular across the men's and the women's? I think you're going to go with women's, though, aren't you?
From the men's perspective, I'll actually start from the men's side. I thought last week was pretty interesting in that we had two smaller events. As far as I know, Dubai is not a Masters tournament. Acapulco is not a Masters tournament. We got to see Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal win tournaments. A lot of times in these smaller events, you don't necessarily maybe see them win, let alone kind of be challenged. There was a lot of really fun matches on the men's side. I mean, the Monfils-Djokovic match was a lot of fun. I even
Don't
liked
talk
the
to me about that match.
Tsitsipas final. I know
Don't
you
talk.
had the money line on Monfils, which was the right play over and over again. But you have to admit that match was pretty fun. That was about as much variance and quality of play I think that you get to see on the men's game. I mean, it really wasn't two people hitting serves. It was a lot of movement, a lot of creative points. I mean, I love the way the two of them, kind of have that wide range in their game, so they can do a little bit of everything, and they're willing to try anything at any point. There's a lot of creativity there. So that's what I thought was kind of my biggest surprise from the men's side. I mean, from the women's side, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it was just some of the women that continue to play well. One particular British woman has had a spectacular couple weeks, and it still doesn't make any sense to me, but she continues to play well. And my very favorite, Arena, the Amazonian warrior princess, Sabalenka, got her first tournament win of the year and looked absolutely spectacular at certain points. I mean, just looked like that incredible player that we talk about a lot and that I get so excited to see. I mean, there were certain, I'm trying to remember which match. Let me pull up here and take a look. But there was one match where I honestly think she could have beaten anybody. And anybody. It was the match against Sakkari. Yeah, she beat Sakkari 6-3, 6-0, and nobody. You could have put you could have put Serena Williams in a time machine from any single year, and she was going to lose to Sabalenka in that match. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was fantastic to watch. So how about you? What got you excited the last 7 days or so?
Yeah, I think it's just that really interesting time in the tour where we've kind of, it's not so much a lull, but some of the really top players in a number of these tournaments aren't playing, and it gives a lot of opportunity for those players who are just on that tier below. And I guess the the difficult thing for us over the next couple of weeks is trying to figure out how the form of these players is actually going to mesh in with when you bring in the consistency of a lot of the top 20 players when we look to Indian Wells and we look to Miami and some of those tournaments we have before we transition more so into the clay, which is as we all know, that's Nick Kyrgios's favorite time of the year based on his comments over the last little while, and a couple of other
loves the dirt
media types as well who have claimed some vulturing from a couple of players over in South America. But I think we saw some good and we saw some bad. Gael Monfils was, like you said, he was a point from being in the news for all the right reasons, and as a result, he was probably in the news for all the wrong reasons. And I'm sure he'd like to play back a couple of those match points again, but that's how it is, and it's showing that he, I guess, is bridging the gap a little bit. But I guess the question for him is, are we going to see that consistency that we've seen from him over the start of the year? Is that going to carry on and into the clay season, or are we going to find him being significantly undervalued against lower ranked players where his motivation perhaps hasn't quite been there in the past, and is it going to present some opportunities to kind of go the other way with things? So I guess that's probably what caught my eye the most. I mean, from a men's perspective, I mean, yeah, Djokovic wins a title, Nadal wins a title. You can, there's not too much you can talk about there with those two, but it's always an interesting one seeing Nadal kind of go down to Acapulco and not head over to Dubai against a couple of the other big players. And it was nice to see him lift a trophy at the end in what was a pretty one-sided final, which Fritz did put together a pretty solid week, but I think he was just caught out a little bit in that final there. But it was certainly a fascinating week of tennis across both the men's and the women's.
I like what you said about Monfils, and maybe to touch on that a little bit more. A lot about watching the men's game is trying to figure out, is there anybody that could beat Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, or Roger Federer, basically? You go through and you look at that list, and maybe less so Federer these days, but you're always looking at it from that aspect. And anytime somebody like Monfils, who I think this week really showed us, he's capable of that. So if he can stay healthy, he can stay motivated, it's going to be really fun, I think, to watch him at Roland Garros this year. So, fingers crossed.
And I think he's now fits into that category with a couple of the other players. You're looking at Tsitsipas, Medvedev over the last 12 months, who, and even Zverev at times.
Yeah, team you put in there as well, right?
Team, yeah. And I'd say that when you look at all of them, they are all bridging that gap, and they're getting closer in the best of three format. I just wonder, I think team is obviously the closest in terms of that best of five to be able to overcome. He beat Nadal at the Australian Open and, pushed Djokovic to the limit there. I think he's the closest to bridging that gap in that best of five format. And I think everyone's waiting for that breakthrough from someone. It's just a matter of, where's it going to come from? But, Monfils was, he did look out on his feet after two sets there. So you think, how would he manage against Djokovic on, say a clay or a Nadal on clay across 5 sets? I know he has the home crowd with him. I guess that's the big question mark there. And I'd love to see him play a couple of those big names, maybe in some of the, Monte Carlo or Madrid or Barcelona, to be able to try and, take a scalp and I guess build his confidence moving into the best of five, where it's going to become a little bit trickier.
Yeah, you're right. When it comes to Grand Slams, it's all about, putting together 2 weeks of solid tennis. And it's funny, the more I think about it, you're right. I think you could see Monfils beating Nadal or Djokovic maybe like in a quarterfinal or something goofy like that, but not being able to get all the way through to actually win the tournament. Again, his inconsistency and frankly, his body breaks down over a 2-week period. So, tough to maybe see that hold up, but it was fun. I mean, it was a great match to watch, and I loved how competitive he was. But like you said, it fell apart in the third set, and that maybe isn't a good indication for obviously a Grand Slam where you have to probably play 4 or 5 to win. Yeah, definitely. Now, we've had a little bit of a chat earlier, and I gave you a list of a couple of questions that I wanted you to answer about a couple of players from last week. So instead of going through each of the draws and talking about everyone, we're going to look at things a little bit differently. So what I thought we'd do was we'd split it up into 4 particular questions, and I'll just pop those ones up on the screen now. Please forgive me if this doesn't work, because live periscopes are fraught with things going wrong. So we'll pop this up on the screen now. Hey,
there we go. There we go. Look at that.
Cheers,
we're off
everybody.
To the side, and that's
everybody clap for Ace.
And that's an advantage, because I'm quite happy for my face to be a little bit smaller on the screen. So the first thing I just wanted to chat through is I guess looking at splitting up into 4 sections. So who I would consider as an ace is who performed brilliantly for the week. So looking at both of us there, we've gone with, I think, a pretty obvious choice on the women's side, which you obviously agree with there, with Arina Sabalenka. What was it that impressed you most about her? Was it the consistency, or was it that particular match against Sakkari, or just the overall week?
I think it was the overall week. I think a lot of it was that match against Sakkari, and then certain points of the Kvitova match in the final. Circling back to that conversation around consistency, Sabalenka is not a consistent player, and I don't know if she ever will be. But I think that she can find enough of that peak tennis during a match to be really great. And I thought the final especially was very good, because she started off kind of hot, slowed down. Kvitova was taking some of the punches and took a little bit of control, but still was able to kind of work through. The Sakkari match again was beautiful to watch. But you can't expect that night in, night out. But you go through, you look at her draw, beats Kontaveit, beats Sakkari, beats Zhang, beats Kuznetsova, beats Kvitova. That's not spectacular, obviously, but it's pretty good. And there's a lot of players that have styles that have given her trouble in the past. So I thought her resiliency was particularly good. I mean, mentally speaking, she can be one of the strongest players on tour. So I think I was mostly impressed with that. But just to see that high level, to see her be able to reach into that and really tap into
Yep.
that potential was great.
And I think something we spoke about at the start of the week was that the conditions were quite windy, particularly early on in the week. And we did have that question mark with Sabalenka based on her performances to start the year. I know she struggled against Suarez Navarro in the Australian Open, and really just could barely find the court at times. But looking at her overall, I think she's certainly making strides in the right direction. I think Tursunov back as coach obviously meshes very well with her style and what she wants to produce. And she said that she did have to deal with some family tragedy over the off season with her father passing away, and obviously there's an adjustment there, and we've seen it. It's sadly it's happened to a number of those top women's players just in the last 9 months. We've had Anisimova, Ostapenko, and Sabalenka all lose family members who work very closely with them year round, and I think she's finally found that consistency again, and she's one of those players who can really build on that, and is probably one to watch moving into the next couple of weeks. Now the next section, so I've got a net court. So probably on paper looks like it was a fantastic week, but perhaps maybe there's some question marks we still have, and maybe not to get too far ahead of yourself, and maybe a little bit of luck. I guess this is who you may have been talking about before when you're talking about a British woman who has defied your expectation over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little longer than the last couple of weeks. I didn't realize, frankly, how little tennis she's played this year. But look at Heather Watson's year. She made the semifinal in the Hobart, now has the title in Acapulco last week. Just really playing above and beyond anything that I really expected from her at any point. So, and again, as I go through and look at the matches, I mean, the win against Coco Vandeweghe, Coco was up a break and a set in the second. She's able to come back from that. I think she just, again, took advantage of Vandeweghe's age and maybe lack of conditioning. Bondarenko is not someone that should be in the second round of an event. She takes advantage of that. The McHale match, gets smoked, gets a bagel there. I'm sorry, a breadstick there in the second set, but is able to blow her away in the third. And McHale just didn't look right for whatever reason. The Jia Wang match, I mean, it was basically a coin flip. She wins at 6-4, 7-6. I thought that Wang had a lot of opportunities to do some great stuff. And Fernandez just got nervous in the final. I think that she got to that third set and she was just mentally and maybe physically, frankly, not prepared to have played that much tennis in a week. So as I look at the week, I mean, she won a title, but I'm not going to put as much stock in that win as maybe a lot of others do.
Yeah, and I guess here's where we have to find that balance a bit with, it's great. And as we said during the week last week, that it's a great opportunity for these players to build some ranking points and to get some wins on the board. But we need to keep that in mind then when we're looking at their ranking and recent form, that it may not potentially stack up when we look at what's going on compared to the rest of the tour at those top level tournaments. I mean, I've mentioned Fernandez there, so we've both gone with the semi, or both finalists from Acapulco. When you go through the wins of Fernandez, there isn't a lot of top, even top 70 talent, I think, in that run. I think it's great, and it's going to be great for her confidence moving forward to be able to, put performances like this into her, CV or resume over the, considering her age and what she's been able to produce. But I just think she's still going to struggle against those really, really big hitters that can find their groove. And, she's got a lot of time to figure it out. I think we've talked about Coco Gauff a number of times. She's very young. And, I think this might just be a case potentially of maybe getting to a final maybe before we expected. But when you go through and look at who she's beaten, and I know you can only beat who's on the other side of the court, but it just doesn't quite marry up, I think, when you look at, I guess, it's probably quite similar to the Thailand tournament the other week, I think, in terms of finalists and players who made it to the end of the week.
Yeah, all I'd say maybe in Fernandez's defense, I think it's impressive, like you said, for someone of her age to play this much tennis in 1 week. She not only made the final, but actually had to qualify for the event. So had another 2 matches before the draw. But you're right. You look through, she beats Cabrera, Levchenko, Stojanovic, Shabino, Potapova, Zarazua and then loses to Watson. There's not really a lot of big, impressive names there. The best win is probably the Potapova win in 2 sets, and maybe
Yep.
even the Zarazua win, just to be that young in front of a home crowd that's raucous and really cheering for the person that's playing against her. And I think maybe that was part of the letdown in the final. I think that took a lot of adrenaline and focus from her, and really was mentally exhausting. But absolutely, I agree. If I had to probably have a second choice for that category, she's pretty close.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, if you were an Australian media type, you'd probably be putting, when we're looking at the disappointments, Ash Barty and pretty much everything, because she only made a semi-final of a tournament, and that's a failure here in Australia at the moment from the media. So we have actually gone with different decisions here. So an unforced error is just who disappointed you the most, basically, over the last week. And looking at the 2 names there that we've picked, it's probably no surprise, and it probably is more an accurate reflection of the first 2 months of the year as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is. I think these are names that if we had done this every single week would be on here multiple times at this point. 2
Yep.
players, one obviously a little less. So, I mean, Stevens has been bad since, probably the beginning of last season, maybe even the end of the season before that. But Svitolina, for whatever reason, I don't know if maybe she's carrying some sort of injury, is on some sort of interesting training schedule arc we don't understand, but just doesn't look right. I mean, Stevens looks healthy, just is not playing good tennis, but Svitolina is just, there's something's not right there, and I can't quite figure out what it is. I don't know if you have been able to put your finger on anything specific, but just doesn't look right to me.
I guess the question is it love?
Is that what you think? She hasn't gotten to play a tournament with Monfils yet?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, got a couple of tournaments coming up where they're going to be at the same site, so you never know. I guess it didn't help her at Brisbane when Monfils was playing the ATP Cup at the same time, because I think she only won a game or 2 against Danielle Collins. But I guess from my perspective, looking at Sloane Stevens, we've got proven Grand Slam winner in the past, and it just nothing seems to be clicking at the moment. And you start to get to that point of is it a case of did she overachieve a couple of years ago, and this is more just this is what we should be expecting, or is there more to it? I guess that's the big question, and we probably won't be able to answer it until the end of this year, or after this North American run where she normally does play her best tennis in North America, whether she can really find her groove again. I must say I'm really intrigued to see how she goes later today. I think she's a short price again, and it's just interesting to see if she can find some confidence on court. Now the bottom one.
Yeah, it's a great matchup, Stevens. We'll see. In the chat, I'm looking. Gonza Diaz is actually at the point where this is, according to him, what he expects from Stevens. So, and I know a couple other people that feel that way. I know a few of our friends have had a lot of fun and excitement fading Sloane. So, maybe this is kind of what you described. Maybe she's peaked and this is really who she is. But I certainly hope not.
And the last section we've got here is, and you've got to put it in Muhammad Layani's voice, it's to replay the point. So we need to forgive these players for what they've done recently. And obviously your name, we'll start with yours. So you've gone with Buzkova, who lost in the first round in 3 sets to Maria. What is it about her, I think, that you've thought that you can forgive her and look to her potentially, in this week and the weeks to come?
I think that she's another player, similar to Svitolina. I'm not sure what's going on, but she's had a really tough start to the year. Qualified for Brisbane, lost to Madison Keys in the first round. No shame in that. But loses to Cece Bellis in the first round in Hobart. That's kind of weird. Loses in the first round to Osaka in the Australian Open. I'm not too worried about that. Made the quarterfinal of a W100. And then the loss to Maria in the first round of Acapulco was just such a strange match. I mean, she gets a 6-1 set in the second there, and then just gets blown out again by Maria. I think Maria is maybe a player that I'm going to have a blind spot for. I really struggle to know when she's going to play well and when she doesn't. But Buzkova is one of the players that I had circled kind of at the end of last year and over the offseason to really favor in some of these hard court events. So I'm still confident in that. And, I've got her right this week. So let's hope it happens.
Fingers crossed. And I guess this one might be a little bit of a surprise to some people, but I've gone with Svitolina as the forgive. And I think we're hitting that interesting point now that, we've had January and February have come and gone, and she hasn't produced her best tennis. And I just wonder if this is maybe a bit of fatigue associated with her end to 2019. So she really did finish the year quite well, and she made it through to the tour finals final against Barty, and she really did play a lot of tennis in the back half of last year. I think that probably combined with, I think there is a confidence issue to it. I think coming into this time last year, she was really struggling with a knee issue and probably wasn't playing her best tennis. But I think this next kind of phase of the year does actually work well with her in terms of conditions that suit and how I think she can perform. And I think we're starting to hit that point now where she is starting to represent perhaps a little bit of value against some of these lower players at the minus game handicap. She's been blown off the court by a couple, Collins and Muguruza amongst others to start the year, but I think she's not far off turning the corner, and I don't think it will take too long. It might just take a win or two for her to find that confidence again. I'm going to ignore that Thailand result. I don't think that there was too much to that against. I think it was Habino. She had Dubai a couple of days later, and had played a bit of tennis, but the advantage, I guess, for her compared to last year is, yes, she's played less tennis, but she doesn't seem to have that knee issue or any particular injury. I think it's just more a confidence thing. So I think things could turn around quite quickly for her.
Yeah, when you look at Indian Wells and Miami, those are really places where she can do well, given her game. Yep. They're really so hard courts, and I think she has a chance to do well there. And maybe that's part of it. She's trying to build up to that or something. And that's what I mean by she just doesn't look right. I watch her game, and it doesn't look like her, and it doesn't seem to be an injury thing. So she's generally mentally one of the stronger players too. So it's not kind of like a Steven situation where it's like, okay, she's just kind of a waif. Something's not right, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I like what you're talking about. That makes a lot of sense.
Alrighty, and now we will jump over and we'll do the same thing and chat about the men from last week. So we'll pop that one up on the screen there. Now, I let you have kind of first crack at a couple of these, so I do agree with most of what you're saying here. You've gone with Tiago as your ace of the week. Now, not many in the media really care too much about the clay tournaments at the moment. So what was it about Tiago that stood out to you? And I know I'm probably putting you on the spot a little bit because you are more WTA biased in your thinking, but if there's anything that you do want to add to these players, do let me know.
Yeah, I think it's, for not just winning the title for Wild, it's some of the players that he beat along the way. I know Guerin retired, but I think a lot of that retirement was that, he knew he was down a set. I thought the final against Casper Ruud was a great win for him. So to see a young player like that really succeed is always something that I try to mark down. And again, part of it's the week. You go through Djokovic won his title, Nadal won his title. So you look at the other tournament, and it's like, that's really kind of the biggest surprise. And you start to look at some of the matches, Bagnes and Lindero aren't fantastic, but those are solid matches for a younger player. I mean, they're tour professionals. And then again, Guerin's very good. We'll talk about Olivo in a little bit, kind of from him just being maybe a little bit of an overachiever. So maybe that one doesn't have as much clout. But, to win a final against Casper Ruud, who, again, might be a little tired, is still impressive to me. So I thought he really took the biggest step forward in terms of, making a name for himself in the last week on the men's side.
Yep, and I think you can see with our responses here that our two aces actually defeated the opposing replay the points. So I had Guerin as my kind of forgive here. I think, Tiago did beat him in that semi-final, but I honestly think that Christian wouldn't have played this week in Santiago if he wasn't from Santiago and from Chile and playing in front of that home crowd. He won that title the week before and I think did say that he was struggling with some sort of injury and just didn't look at his best across the week. And I think he had 6 set points in that first set when he was serving for it against Wheel. I mean, some call him Wild, some call him Wheeled. I think it was more a case of just then at that point, once he was behind, that there was no point playing 2 more sets. I just don't think he had it in him. My ace, I went over to probably the more, it was a very competitive week of tennis in Dubai, and I was quite impressed with Dan Evans' ability to get through a couple of really tricky matches, one of which was against Andrei Rublev. I think what he has with his game is he has that variety that we just don't see as much now on the men's tour. I mean, he's got one of the best backhand slices in the game. Once he looks at his one, if he can look after his serve and play with that confidence, I think everything else flows. And although he was probably a little bit overawed by the occasion with that semi-final against Tsitsipas, it's nice to see him kind of taking those steps and digging himself out of holes that we probably haven't seen in the past. I mean, he was a couple of match points down against Herbert in a final set tiebreak and came back and won it. It's those matches that's going to really build in confidence, and I'm fascinated to see how he goes over the next couple of months, but particularly into the grass season. I know his grass season, I think it was last year, was cruelled a little bit by an ankle injury, but I'm fascinated to see how he stacks up against the best now that he's putting himself into a position where he's going to be seeded at a lot of these tournaments.
Yeah, I thought he had a great week, and continues to be one of the more interesting players as he starts to get into real full form. It'll be fun to watch a full season of Dan Evans.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the net court. So, we don't want these people to get too ahead of themselves. You've gone for Renzo.
Yeah,
Quick
qualifier
question.
in Santiago. Go ahead.
How much do you know about Renzo?
Almost nothing. I know that he qualified this week. I know that he beat Pablo Cuevas, Delian, and lost to Wild or Thiago or whatever we should call him. And that's honestly why I picked the name. As I was going through and looking at it, I mean, he was, as you start to look at the draws, a lot of the players that were supposed to win last week, I think did for the most part, give or take a few spots. And the biggest spot, again, was seeing his name in the quarterfinals. I mean, Cuevas loses in 3 sets on clay. That's so weird. I wonder if it's this time of the year where people are starting to get more buys and maybe that throws things off. The Delian match, again, I know there was a lot of people that had Delian in parlays and things for that. So,
yep.
Not somebody that I'm really excited. And then again, you look at the Wild match, just gets absolutely smacked. So I think that maybe he got a few lucky breaks along the way, and I'm not really going to be super excited about him for the rest of the year. I'll be shocked if we talk about him again.
Yeah, I think he obviously took advantage of, he is a grinder and he will extend points out, as much as he can. I think Sousa in the first round is still coming back from an injury that he picked up before the final a couple of weeks ago. Cuevas just hasn't delivered consistently. I think that his best performance this year has been against Schwartzman, where he, basically lost the unlosable there, and Diego was able to stage a massive comeback. I don't think it's, we're probably going to see Oliver probably more so at that challenger clay level. He's sitting around, I think, 200 in the world at the moment. So it's going to be tough. And, he might be one to keep an eye on maybe for Roland Garros qualifying if he gets a couple of players where, that clay isn't their strong suit and they're perhaps just there to see what happens. But I guess that's we'll wait and see what happens there. We've got a couple of months between now and then. My one was, again, probably a little bit harsh, but I went with Tsitsipas. I think he did well considering he was coming off the Marseille title the week before. But I think, he was the beneficiary of a weaker draw than, perhaps we expected at the start of the week. I think he could have faced Bautista Agut and Rublev, but ended up with Evans and Struff, who was able to take advantage of and had the experience edge over. But I was quite disappointed. I mean, I know I took Djokovic minus 3.5 games in the final, but I think he's just, he played well for patches and he just gives up spots that he perhaps shouldn't. And I think that's the next progression for him, is to really lock in against all types of opponents. We've seen him struggle against big servers at times to start the year, and I'm interested to see where his ceiling is. But I think it's more the psychological, the consistency from start to finish that you need to see from him a little bit more for him to take that next step.
Yeah, I didn't mind that pick from you. I mean, that Struff match specifically was very losable. And like you said, he had kind of some favorable spots there. So I thought that was a pretty reasonable pick by you.
Yeah, and a couple, I think the first couple of rounds needed tie breaks in the first set against Carreño Busta and Bublik. So, he was able to run away with it once he got on top. But, I would have been fascinated to see how he went if he fell behind against, a player like Bublik, who's quite a confidence player. But we just didn't quite see it on this occasion. Looking to the unforced error of the week. Now, you've gone with Is it a Zverev or both Zverevs, or are we just going with Alexander?
We're just going to go with Alexander Zverev.
That's fair.
You look at the week, he decides to go to Acapulco instead of playing a lot of the bigger names in Dubai, and still only manages to make it out of the first round. Beats a qualifier in the first round, and then loses to Tommy Paul pretty easily in 2 sets. Maybe again he's just like you talked about with Sloane Stephens, and maybe maybe whatever we saw a couple of years ago is the absolute best of him, and he's not maybe as good as we thought he was, because again, you look at the beginning of the year from him, and even some of the stuff at the end of last year, it's a lot of rough stretches for him, and he doesn't really seem to be growing and becoming more competitive. He seems to be taking steps backwards. What have you seen from him?
Yeah, it does seem to be a case of one step forward, one step backwards, and maybe it was a case of this week. The only thing I really saw from him across the week was the fact that he couldn't button up his shirt to go to the pre-tournament party. I think that was the highlight for him of the week. But yeah, it was a disappointing performance against Paul, and I guess Jung the day before was able to get the early break, and I think it was just slow starts that put him on the back foot, and when he's not at the highest level of confidence, he just couldn't convert that into wins. I think he's still a lot of it comes down to that rhythm with his serve, and we saw that in a great way in Melbourne at the Australian Open. But he's not quite back to where he was at his best that we saw a couple of years ago, and that's probably another case of did someone peak a little bit too early and wasn't quite ready to handle what came with that success at that time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I went with RBA, so Roberto Bautista Agut. Disappointing to start against Struff. I actually had really high hopes for him last week. He has won the tournament before, and I thought the conditions would suit. Evidently, it did not, and he was knocked out in straight sets, and it kind of produces a bit of a worrying trend, I guess, to start the year. And we looked at how well he played the ATP Cup, and he went through undefeated. I guess with that, he got a lot of points and he got a lot of wins, but the quality of those wins outside of the Kyrgios match probably aren't quite there as compared to what other players had to do to earn equivalent ranking points. It was disappointing in Melbourne against Cilic, and I still thought, and I was forgiving over the hard, the indoor hard court little stretch there, but I think I'm off him now. I think I need to see a little bit more from him in terms of his consistency, but he just doesn't seem to have that drive that I guess we've come to expect of him over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and last year he had a really hot start to the year. I was pulling this up just to make sure that my memory was correct. Wins the final in Doha, makes a quarterfinal at the Australian Open, quarterfinal in Sofia, quarterfinal in Miami. I mean, just a really, really hot start to the year. But outside of the ATP Cup, not much, if anything, really from him. Lost in the third round of the Australian Open, second round in Rotterdam.
Yep.
Now first round in Dubai. Just the exact opposite of what we saw last year.
And I think that's the thing that not necessarily I struggle with him at the moment when I'm trying to kind of match up his form, but he's performed in the past so well against the likes of Djokovic and Tsitsipas, and he gives his best against those top players, but he's just not getting to that point in the draw at the moment to actually have that opportunity. I thought he would have matched up quite well against a tired Tsitsipas, and he just doesn't get there. He can't get past Struff. So, I think whereas in the last couple of weeks, I've considered him from more of an outright perspective, it might be a case of finding him in particular spots against players and just seeing if he can bring back his form slowly but surely before, jumping into an outright price like we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And now if we take a look, so your forgive for this week, so you're happy to go again with him looking forward, is Andrei Rublev.
Yeah, it's tough to be disappointed in somebody that made a quarterfinal, but being it's a smaller event, only 2 wins to get to that quarterfinal. But I think he just ran into a red-hot Dan Evans in an event where, maybe he wasn't at his very best. He struggled a little bit in his first match against qualifier Musetti. Krivjinovic was able to take him to a tiebreaker in the first, and then just fell apart for whatever reason. And then just Dan Evans was really hot that day. So I'm not worried about Andrei Rublev, and I think a lot of people probably had him circled not only to win that quarter, but to probably make the finals in that event, or at least have a chance.
Yeah, definitely. And as Andy Watson Sports there said, in his opinion, Dan Evans is currently the best player to have not won an ATP title, which, there probably wouldn't be too many players that you'd put above, um,
I'm
thinking
trying
about
to think if there's an easy list
what's
on
through at the
that.
moment. I mean, Auger Aliassime has gone 0-5 in finals, but just thinking through, it's probably a pretty solid comment there from Andy. So thanks for popping that into the comment section. I guess talking to your point of Rublev, I think what he struggled with against Evans was that variety that we talked about before. I think Evans was able to really utilize that backhand slice quite a lot, and it meant that, Rublev was having to generate all the pace consistently, and I think sometimes he can still dig himself a little bit of a hole in terms of errors at some key times. I mean, when I personally think that Andrei Rublev in full flight at his best is, possibly one of the top 5 men's tennis players to watch. But when it goes bad, it can go really, really bad.
Yeah.
So for him, it's all about, generating that consistency, and, hopefully he can. I'll be fascinated to see how he stacks up, particularly, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, as a player looking into that North American hard court stretch where we've got perhaps some slower hard courts as well, that he's certainly one to watch.
Yeah, he's definitely a name I have circled for the Sunshine Double.
Yep, definitely. And, as I said a little bit before, I think Jurin, I think he, as I said, he was injured. Looking at Casper Ruud and himself over the last month, they've kind of tag teamed which week they were going to play well, and the other person was going to be a little bit tired. And they've both come out of it with some pretty solid ranking points. But I'm happy to forgive, and I think he's genuinely one of the players to watch outside of the big names that. Looking at those tournaments leading up to Roland Garros, I think he's one that can potentially take a lot of scalps. I'm not saying he's going to beat Nadal or he's going to beat Djokovic, but I think he could really surprise, and you might see him popping up in those quarterfinals and semifinals of the 250s and 500s. Even maybe one of the Masters 1000 coming up into the French Open.
Yeah, he's going to be. I think he's going to be a fun underdog to bet in some of those matches against better players. Him and Ruud, especially. I don't know, how their game translates to a 5-set.
Yep.
Versus a 3-set. But I'm optimistic again about both of their games. They have just perfect games for clay with their ability to move and as much power as they generate. So a lot of fun. And I think you're right. Just a horrible fatigue spot for him. Like you said, if the tournament was anywhere else, he probably isn't playing.
Yeah, definitely. Now, for those who are watching along, if you want to send through, and we'll pop a little, I guess, screen grab of what we've put up for each of those 4 categories up on Twitter after we finish here. But if you want to pop it into the comment section as well, who you thought, who surprised you perhaps last week, who you thought may have been a little bit lucky or went further than you perhaps anticipated, or if there's anyone who disappointed you or you're happy to forgive, just chuck it into the comment section and we can get your comments up on the screen while we're chatting. What we might do now is we'll head into, if I can just take away this screen and bring us back onto there we go. We're full screen again, which is it's a bit much. There we go. Let's go back to there. We will jump on through to just a little bit of a chat, I guess, about the tournaments we've got on at the moment. And, as you said, this week, very WTA heavy, which is right up your alley. We'll start with Lyon in France. Is that the one with the very bright pink court we've got going on this week?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's
I believe really so. I didn't get to watch too much this morning, but I'll try to do a better job tomorrow.
Yeah,
I think that is one of the ones at the pink court.
Yeah, I watched a little bit. I had to turn the screen brightness down just a touch. It's potentially a little bit too much. But what have you what are you looking for this week out of this tournament? Is there any particular players you're really going to be keeping a keen eye on?
Yeah, this is one of the first indoor events we've had on hard courts this year. So when you get to indoors, there are certain players that really thrive. The name that I was most excited about was Alison van Uytvanck. You look at her draw, took Arakawa today without any problems. Don't expect her to have any issue with the winner of Tomova Freck. Maybe plays her girlfriend there. I'm sorry, Minen actually lost today, so maybe gets Caroline Garcia, maybe gets Yaseline Bonaventure. Again, not too worried there. I think this draw sets up nicely for her. And you see Sophia Kenin there in that top spot, and I think that she was like a plus 250, I think, to win the tournament. 2.5 to 1, which in the WTA is an absurd number. I mean, Serena Williams isn't even really that big of a favorite a lot of times. So puts a lot of value in other numbers. And Van Uytvanck was the big name I had circled on the top half. The bottom, I did like Badosa, but unfortunately she pulled out. So hard to win the tournament if
Yeah.
you're not playing in it.
Yeah, laws make things a little bit difficult. You're probably just as much as likely as Jack Sock winning a tournament he's actually participating in.
That's correct.
I actually agree with you around Van Uytvanck in that top half of the draw. I think, and we talk a little bit about that. You see players put in big performances like Sophia Kenin did in Australia. She's not going to represent a lot of value, and she sits in that position a little bit like Medvedev did at the end of 2019. I just don't think there's going to be value,
that's a great
and
example.
She's probably as each loss comes, she's going to slowly edge back to kind of that appropriate pricing, I guess, from an odds perspective. I'm fascinated to see how she goes against Diatchenko in the first round, just because the Russian has the ability to blast anyone off the court on her day, and in perfect indoor conditions, that could be a pretty big upset alert there, I think, for me. But looking to it, because I am keen to see that Kenin will have her hands full with a couple of those players in the top quarter. I do agree that Van Uytvanck is the one to keep an eye on. I think she should have a relatively friendly second round. I actually was a little bit disappointed to see Kostyuk lost yesterday after some solid tennis at a lower level against Bonaventure, but Van Uytvanck from the top half is certainly the one I'll be keeping an eye on. From the bottom half, you look at players that in that third quarter, I would, and she has struggled over the last year and a half. I'd love to see Kasatkina put together a pretty solid week here. She generated 30 break points against Muguruza last week, which is impressive for a 3-set match, and just couldn't get over the line there. I think she's one to keep an eye on. But one down the bottom that I'll be, I guess, particularly keeping an eye on from my perspective is Anna Bogdan. I think we saw her in Limoges in December make the final and lose to Alexandrova. She played really well through the couple of Fed Cup matches that were played on the indoor hard court. I think she beat Kudermetova and lost to Alexandrova in 3 sets. So I think she's one to really keep an eye on, because she is starting to find that form again. And once she's feeling good with her movement and feeling on top of things, that it all does start to click. And looking at, I guess, the very bottom section there, it's nice to see Annalena Friedsam back at WTA level and looking healthy. So she obviously won her first round there in straight sets. And I remember back to a couple of years ago, she played, I think it was a couple of really good tournaments in Linz, I think at home in Austria, but has been cruelled with injuries over the last couple of years. So it's just great to see her back. But I think Kasatkina could potentially come out of that third quarter, maybe if she can get the better of you would assume Cornet, based on what we saw in round one. But Bogdan is one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on from that bottom section, because Kirkov, Kuzmova, they're both quite big hitters. I think if Bogdan can get out of this little section with Martin Kova and those two, she could really generate some form moving into the latter stages of the week.
Yeah, Kasatkina is the name I've actually got in the finals in my little bracket challenge bracket. It's funny, when you think about her game, you don't necessarily think about indoor hard courts. That's usually players where you look for more power, bigger serves. But traditionally, she's done very well. I wonder if maybe she's impacted by sun, she's impacted by wind a lot, and just is comfortable being inside and is able to hit her spots well enough on serve to take advantage. We've seen her exceed in indoor tournaments before, and like you said, you look at the draw. Parmentier in the first round, that should be a blowout. She's going to play Barra in the second round, should be able to beat her. And then Cornet, maybe Georgie, maybe Lapko even. I mean, that's, she kind of walks into that semifinal where she's looking at maybe Mladenovic. Like you said, Friedsam could maybe even pull the upset there. Bogdan maybe gets through. But a lot of really beatable players for her. And I think that this draw opens up nicely. So definitely agree that's a great opportunity for her.
Yeah, but I noticed through your discussion there, you used one of my favorite terms in all of betting and predictions, which is should, particularly on the WTA. Should win. We're not saying that she will, but we think that, it's as well as you can predict these things. I think that it's a good position for her based on her form over the last couple of weeks in particular. Now,
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe we'll let's head over to Mexico, shall we?
Let's do it.
So we'll go to Monterrey there. What's standing out to you?
Looking at this draw, again, we've got Svitolina. Maybe this is the week she starts to play well, but we talked about her. The most interesting name for me, and maybe we'll start in the bottom half here, is Victoria Azarenka.
Yep.
This is the first time we're going to see her all year. She has been in court battles over custody of one of her children. That sucks. But she's somebody that actually has a history of kind of these long layoffs. Having her child, the first major injury, I think she's had a couple custody battles at this point. So as you look at the last couple of years, she actually has these long stretches of not playing, but then when she comes back, she's red hot. So whatever training she's doing to build up toward those weeks obviously seems to be working. And this is a great draw for her. Has Zidancic in the first round, logically and correctly, a huge favorite there. Potapova should be very beatable. Then maybe Konta, maybe Kleisters, maybe Watson again for some reason. That's a really winnable match. You look at the winner of the third quarter. Buzkova is probably the name out there. Maybe it's Wang Yafad. Maybe Venus Williams, dips back into the fountain of youth. But just a great draw for her, and the name that I was the most excited about for this week. So that was the biggest name. So why don't we start at the bottom, and maybe we'll jump back up to the top and see if we can think of something nice to say about Svitolina or Sloane Stephens or Sarah Soraba's trash can.
Now, I guess, the most fascinating part about this draw is, as we said, had you said this 3 years ago that we'd have, Svitolina and Stephens in the top quarter, you'd be quite fascinated. But it's interesting to see where they're going to go from here. But when you go to that bottom quarter, you've got Kim Clijsters and Victoria Azarenka. It presents a really interesting position for those who like, exposed recent form versus those coming off layoffs. From what I've seen of Azarenka in terms of her training, she looks as fit as I've ever seen her in terms of her movement. And, you can tell that and I can only imagine that, with everything that she's going through and knowing that she's been missing these tournaments just because she hasn't been able to, through circumstance as opposed to injury, she's going to be at, her best level from a fitness standpoint. I agree that it's a great little spot there for her, and I think she should be winning through those first couple of rounds quite comfortably. I think the third quarter, it's not great in terms of when you compare it to the others. I think, Astra Sharma has started to find a little bit of form, but I just don't see it all coming together here. I think, your forgive of Buzkova, I think, is in a really good spot here in this section. And I think she would be someone who may represent a little bit of trouble for an Azarenka in a semi if they would. Oh, would they meet in a semi, or actually that'd be in a quarter, wouldn't it?
I think that's.
Let me have a little bit of a look. Yeah. I think it's a tricky one because you've got those people who, are coming off those long layoffs, but you've also got, Heather Watson, who's come off a week and a title. You've got, Potapova, who the difference between her best and her worst is, you can't even put it on the same piece of paper. It'll be interesting, I think, as we're talking now, that Venus Williams versus Schmiedlova match is going ahead with Venus up a set but down a break. I think that bottom half is definitely Azarenka's. If she can bring her best, but there are those question marks, and there's a difference between being match fit and actually having those match practice opportunities, and how you go on break point up and how you manage break point down, or it's those things that can sometimes be the last thing to come back. So even if she did lose in the first couple of rounds here, I'd still be pretty keen to get involved at what could be a nice price on her, looking to a couple of those tournaments ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity. As I start to bounce up again to that top half, like you said, you've got Svitolina, you've got Stephens. Man, that should be interesting. But the name I'm actually most curious to watch is Rebecca Peterson. She's had a long
Hmm.
layoff, had an injury at the end of last year. I think struggled to rehab a lot through the offseason because of that and really get into tip-top shape. Has taken a couple of weeks, if not a month off at this point to rehab some back stuff and was able to fight back
Back
today down
today.
a set. Got all the way to a tiebreaker in the second set, but won that tiebreaker to 1 point and was able to win the third set 6-4.
Yep.
If she's playing well, if she's back to being the tennis player we thought she was last year, this becomes a very attackable draw. I mean, her second round opponent is terrible. I mean, that's one of the first worst round matches that you'll ever see. She's going to get Bondarenko or Tormo, and then maybe Lauren Davis, maybe
Yeah.
Roos. Not really worried about that. So I think that's the name that I'm most excited to watch. I don't expect her to win the tournament, but it's somebody I'm going to watch and try to catch as much of her matches as I can.
Yeah, and she is a fascinating one, and we've spoken about her a couple of times this year. And I'm just going to quickly get it up. I think it was Alex, who's one of the writers or founder of Tennis Portland, made a comment about Rebecca earlier today in that she actually, I think she got a new coach at the end of last year and had that coach through the start of this year. And with that coaching change, she actually changed from Babolat to a head tennis racket. And obviously, she started the year very poorly by her standards and what we saw at the end of last year. In February, she fired her coach, and now she's back with the Babolat again. So, it's one of those things that you probably, you're never going to see it on paper, and it's not going to come up on, when you look in the results. But obviously, she's back with a familiar racket that brought her success at the end of last year. She's taken that time off from a fitness perspective. I think she did a great job today. You said she came from a set down, but she was also 3-love up in that final set against Kozlova, and then trailing 3-4 and could reel off. I think it was the 3 games to finish off.
That's a great point. That's a really tough spot to be able to break like that and then to give it back and come back.
Yeah, so it was certainly a roller coaster match there, but she will take confidence from that. So she's gone back to that racket that she's played with, or that brand of racket she's played with her whole life. So I think that she is the one to come out of that second quarter. The first quarter, I mean, we could be here in a week talking about Stevens or Svitolina making the most of their opportunities, or we could be.
No one wants to hear that.
Or we could have another week of disappointment. I think part of my forgive comment for Svitolina earlier was, having a look at this draw, and I think this is a draw that will really help build her confidence if she makes the most of it. I think she's got Kovanic in the first round, and then I think it would be Govotsova, and then if you look at one of Navarro, Stevens, Vogli, or Fernandez to get to the quarterfinals, I think it's a perfect opportunity for her to be able to find some form. It's just about her actually taking advantage of that. And I think if she does get out of this quarter, I think she wins the tournament.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's exactly the spot she's in. So we'll see. It's again, as you look at the top half, again between Svitolina, Stevens, and Peterson, there's a lot of, and even Davis, frankly, there's a lot of players that have really struggled up here. So it'd just be nice to see anybody come out and play inspired tennis, frankly. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I'm trying to be optimistic about this top half, Steve.
That's fair enough. Now, the third tournament we've got going on is, we've got the women's and the men's going on in Indian Wells, and that kind of precursor tournament to, the action that's going to kick off next week. Is there anyone in particular that's standing out to you in Indian Wells?
Let me see if I can actually pull that draw up. I mean, I'm looking at some of the first round matches. We've got a lot of fun players. I mean, Callan Sky is in this tournament. She's played really well. There's a Zavatska Di Lorenzo match tomorrow that should be fun. Coco Vandeweghe is a big favorite, which is interesting to me. Shelby Rogers is in here. Another player that's kind of coming off a long layaway. But let me see if I can pull up the draw quickly on Flashcore, because I know that because this is a smaller tournament, not a lot of places actually have a draw.
I guess the big upset early was Katie McNally losing to Sasha Vickery in straight sets.
Vickery's funky. She's somebody that has a lot of really big wins on her resume. As you go back through and look, it's really weird. She retires from a lot of matches. She gets blown out a lot, but has a lot of wins against really big players. And I'm excited actually to watch. I did get the draw pulled up here. She plays Katerina Siniakova in the second round in what could be the best or worst tennis match of all time. There could be a 3-set under here. This could be amazing. So as you look at that, it'll be fun to see Siniakova. Monica Puig is back playing this week. Looks like she'll get Karumi Nara. I'm excited to watch her. Laura Siegmund has shown signs of life. She's in this tournament. It'll be fun to see her play Harriet Dart. Harriet Dart off a tough comeback this week. Looking down a little bit further, Jessica Pegula, somebody that we really love on hard courts, and we've talked about a lot. She's playing again this week. Taylor Townsend brings her funky, serve volley game in, and I think we'll get to see a lot of that. That should be fun. Olga Danilovic, another young player that I think we talked a lot about maybe 2 years ago and a little bit at the beginning of last season and really tailed off. Popped up again this week. She won a tough 3-setter against Seppi Roy, and Roy isn't the player that she used to be, but it takes a lot of mental fortitude to beat her still. So you look at that. Katie Bolter's playing again this week. You got Blankova again. So just kind of a fun week. Again, the names that I'm most excited about as I was scrolling through and talking about Pegula, just to see if she continues to play really great tennis. That's a name that I'm looking forward to betting in some of these smaller WTA events. I think that she maybe strategically chose to come here instead of go some other places this week. Maybe tune things up and get herself ready for the Sunshine Double. So that was the name, and then Puig. Puig again. I want to see how she looks. It's been a while since we've seen her.
Yeah, and I think she's coming back from pretty severe or significant elbow surgery, I think it was. So, she will probably take a little time to get going, but it will be interesting to see how she matches back up. And I guess one you may have missed there in terms of the second round matches, I feel like we're back in 2010. Samantha Stosur versus Vera Zvonareva.
Oh my God! I did try to skip that.
Yeah, no, that's
the
fair.
AARP special.
Yeah. Now, Zvonareva was actually pretty solid in that first round. I think she beat Wang, who is young and was coming off a long week last week in Acapulco. She won that 6-4, 6-1. I think she was about $2.40. Looking at
she was a pretty decent underdog. I actually had Wang in a parlay. Zvonareva is still very talented. If she's healthy and feeling spry for the week, she can definitely mess some things up as we saw today.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. When everything clicks, and she is, is quite fluent off both wings. That when things do click, that she is still, really good to watch, and it'll be an interesting dynamic, I guess, watching her against Stosur, who, has taken a little bit of time off since the Australian Open. I agree with your comments on Laura Siegmund. I think the slower hard courts that we generally see in Indian Wells, are right up her alley. Bernarda Pera is probably another one that I'd love to see more from. But it's just a matter of getting on developing that consistency that we haven't quite seen from her. We know that her best can match it with a lot, but it's a fascinating little draw here, and obviously all these players are trying to get a bit of form and are either in the main draw of Indian Wells or in qualifying, and it's a good spot to kind of set up base for a couple of weeks and find a little bit of consistency in the game after kind of zigzagging across the world to start the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly the kind of tournament where you see players like this, which is fun. I think that a lot of people maybe discount the level of effort for some of the bigger names in smaller events like this, but I think given its location, given its timing of the year, you're actually going to see the best out of these players for definitely the first couple rounds. I guess as I start to look through, do you see any names that maybe later in the week might kind of shut things down a little bit? I guess they do get a decent break before the actual next tournament starts, but is there anybody you can see doing that? I didn't see any names as I was going through quickly. Again, maybe somebody like Puig plays a couple matches and kind of shuts it down, but I think everybody else should be kind of at full effort here.
Yeah, I don't really see any with this, and I guess when you're not having to travel to the next tournament, you're getting time on court in identical conditions to what we'll see in Indian Wells. I think it's a great opportunity for the likes of Townsend and Blinkova, who can beat some, and Pegula, like we said before, who can really produce some high quality tennis. I think it's a great opportunity for those players to just adjust, and any advantage you will take at the top level you need to take advantage of. And if it was the case of a lot of these players wouldn't have made the main draw in Lyon, and you could maybe make a case for Mexico, but if you want to stay and get yourself set and build that base like we talked about, I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of these players, and you will probably see a lot of a lot of quality tennis this week for the women, but also for the men, because I think from the men's perspective, we've got a lot of I think there's the wild cards for Indian Wells are up for grabs, through the Challenger circuit. But it's also a fascinating draw there for the Indian Wells Challenger tournament.
It is. It's fun. It's nice to have some events like this. Again, we're really spoiled from a WTA perspective. It's probably as deep as it's ever been.
Yep.
And like you said, on a week where there's no men's tennis, really, I mean, there's a couple challenger events that are relatively entertaining, but certainly down to the big names this week, it is a godsend for me to have this Indian Wells Challenger.
Yeah, and with this Challenger, I guess it does bring up that interesting dynamic that we've got these players who are going to Indian Wells to play the Challenger before the main, the bigger tournament. And then you've got the top players from a lot of countries scattered all over the world playing Davis Cup. So, De Minaur and Kyrgios were meant to be playing in Adelaide this week, but have both pulled out with injury, and they look like to be some significant injuries for those two. But thinking about a lot of different players are going to be playing in different continents on different surfaces, you've got players here who could really take advantage. And looking at players like Humber as the top seed, you got Cam Norrie, you got Sinner, Tiafo playing Mo in the second round, Chris O'Connell who's over there. One to really keep an eye on is Luca Pui, who's coming back from injury. This is his first time back to playing against Noah Rubin, who was actually quite impressive in that first round. And Noah's doing some fantastic work in terms of his stuff. Looking at tennis and the tennis tour and mental health and players. with his work with behind the racket. But
yeah, we love that.
I think it's a really interesting spot here for him for Pui to come back. He might be the one that maybe one or two matches might be enough just to kind of see where he's at, and I probably wouldn't get involved with actively backing him this week. But this draw is a pretty solid. You'd probably see this as that kind of ATP 250 qualifying heading into kind of early rounds in some of these matches.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely has that level of play.
So it'll be interesting to see how this draw unfolds across the week. And again, they'll be playing in Indian Wells next week, and it's a fascinating tournament, I guess, when you look at it from a singles perspective. But you see some very loaded doubles pairs as well, which we might talk about a little bit more next week. But what we
not
might
ready
do
for
is,
doubles yet. I got a lot more homework to do if we're going to talk about doubles.
But you get a lot of the big names pairing up here at Indian Wells, and I guess it's something to also consider that we've got the
love that.
And we've got the Olympics later in the year as well. So, there's a mixture of kind of some power pairings, but also some people who are looking to, with one eye on Tokyo, assuming the Olympics goes ahead with everything that's going on at the moment with the coronavirus.
Yeah. And, best to everybody on that. Be very careful. There's a lot of things going around. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's not true, but be careful. Avoid people that are sick. If you're sick, go see a doctor. Cover your mouth. Come on, people. Let's try to be adults about this.
And I think, there's a lot of talk at the moment about, how people greet each other and to not shake hands. And I think a lot of tennis players would quite enjoy not having to shake hands at the net after a spiteful match on tour.
That could be good. You're right. More fist bumps.
It could work for
How do
a
we
couple.
Copyright the fist bump? Is there any money we can make off this?
I don't know.
Does someone own the fist bump?
We can look into it. I mean, the Bryan brothers own the chest bump.
Can you own a hand gesture?
Yeah, I don't know. But I guess the chest bump, you're kind of getting a little bit too close, aren't you? We might have to have
then you're really mouth to mouth still, which is still the problem.
That's a bit much.
Let's do chest bump like to the side. Maybe do a side bump kind of thing,
maybe,
shoulder to shoulder.
I mean, looking at, Kyrgios and a couple of other players, maybe we just get people to comment to each other on Twitter. I'm sure nothing could go wrong there in terms of acknowledging people after a match.
I love that. Now, that's a great idea. More social media, more better.
Yeah.
Tsitsipas send out weird tweets after every match.
Yeah, and I can just picture Kyrgios saying, "Well played, dirt rat," to someone on the clay. That would be just fantastic. We might just take a quick look at. So we've got Indian Wells and Miami coming up, and I just thought, maybe if you got a couple of plays to keep an eye on coming into these couple of weeks, and then what we might do is for anyone listening, if you've got any questions or anything, we might finish off with with a couple of questions there. So pop them into the comment section at the bottom. If you're watching on Periscope, just type it in there and hit send, and we'll pop it up on the screen and discuss it. Who stands out to you for this Sunshine Double coming up?
And starting from the women's side, obviously the big name is Bianca Andreescu. Should be the first time we get to see her this year.
Yep.
Obviously last year was probably the best player on hard courts all year.
Yep.
And in a lot of adverse situations, came in with injuries, fought through injuries, wasn't necessarily healthy all year. So not someone I'm going to write off right away, but probably not going to back. I think that's probably the most exciting timeline. Like we talked about earlier, Svitolina.
Yep.
Curious to see what she can do, what her level is going to be like. Serena Williams, I thought she actually looked pretty good at early points of this year, and I wonder how much effort she's going to put into playing some of those tournaments. But as you start to look at some other names, girls like Rybakina, Vondrousova. Rybakina's had a fantastic start to the year. Vondrousova very much the other way. Can Rybakina keep it up? Is Vondrousova going to be able to find her form a little bit? Maria Sakkari is someone that I thought has played some great tennis this year, and I think that these courts fit her game really well. So excited to see her, flipping down a little bit. That was kind of the top 20 run through a little bit. Again, Peterson is somebody, if she looks good this week, could be really dangerous in these events. The young Coco Gauff, I think that we'll see in at least one, if not both of these. That'll be a lot of fun. Again, Buskova, see if she can find her form. Azarenka, again, coming back to play tennis. But I think that those were most of the names that I had circled. Trying to see if there's even some young Americans in here. Again, Townsend had kind of a nice run at these events last year, so curious to see if she can kind of do that again. And then Jill Teichmann is probably the last name I'm going to talk about. I think that she is going to be a killer this year on slow court, so excited to see what she's able to do. But from the women's perspective, what were you seeing?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with most of those players there. I think the only other ones I'd probably mention is, you didn't mention Sabalenka, but I think that's obviously assumed based on how well she played last week, that winning form is good form, and she is such a confidence player that she will generate a lot of confidence from that performance in Doha. The other two players, I think someone who is probably at that phase now where she is going to have fallen under the radar a lot, but does look to be quite suited by the conditions, is Angelique Kerber. I think we haven't seen a lot of her. I don't think we've seen her really.
That's a great name to talk about.
That we know what her best is capable of, and if she's at full fitness, we saw that. I think she made the final of Indian Wells last year and lost to Andreescu, was it?
Yep.
She's suited to the conditions. She's got points to defend. She again is another one of those confidence players, but on that slower hard court, she is going to be very tough to beat if she's fit. I think the time off has probably done her well, because she did have that hamstring issue in Adelaide against Jastrzemska, which was a quick turnaround then to play in Melbourne. But I think she's one to watch, that if she's able to turn up and bring her best, she's going to be someone who could present as a bit of value in what looks to be a pretty stacked draw. The other one who's probably performed well at these tournaments in the past and is more of a big match player is Yelena Ostapenko. I know if Spread's listening, we know he's obviously a big fan of Ostapenko. However,
nothing yet in the comments. So he must not be out there. I don't know. He doesn't like us anymore.
Yeah, no. We'll see if we won't let him know. We'll see if he just watches it and then lets us know. But I think she's one. She played quite well in Doha. Lost to Kvitova in a 3-setter in really windy conditions, but she's starting to find form. And Bartoli wasn't with her in Doha, but I'd imagine she'd probably be joining up with her again for this little run here, and is one to keep an eye on as well.
I think that's a great pick. And like you said, that Kvitova match, I thought she had chances to win that. So that's another really good name. Again, her game translates very well to some of these courts.
Yep. And I guess looking to just quickly, was there anyone on the men's side that you're kind of keeping an eye on into this next little patch?
Yeah, let me go through the list here real quick. Dominic Thiem coming off that hot run. I think that, again, these slower courts should be really good for him. We've got no Federer, so I think that opens things up a little bit. I know that you weren't too nice to Stefanos Tsitsipas earlier, but I think that his game might translate very well, so I'm excited to see what he can do. Again, Gael Monfils continues to have a great year. FAA, the young Canadian, I think he made a run at one of these last year. I can't exactly remember, but excited to see what Miami. He can do.
I think it
Yeah.
was Miami. He went on a bit of a run and was up a break, I think, in both sets against John Isner, and just didn't quite get over the line there.
And you got to wonder what some of the clay guys can do. Like, Casper Ruud, I imagine, is going to be playing in both events. I wonder if, he can switch back to hard and continue to just smash the ball.
Yeah.
Those were some of the names from the bigger players. As I kind of float through to the outer edges, I'm down in like the 70s right now. Nobody really pops out. Maybe, Francis Tiafoe, somebody that, did well in these events last year and really hasn't played good tennis since. Would
Yeah.
love to see him. Somebody who just seems to have an overwhelming amount of talent and about as little brains as he does athleticism. So maybe he can find himself a little bit here. So who did you like from the men's side? Who are you kind of circling and thinking we might find some value on?
Yeah, I'm thinking, looking off the recent form and the form to start the year, and we talked about it a little bit before with Svitolina, but I think it might be a similar case now with Medvedev. I think he's, with Federer being injured, Medvedev will slot into the 4 seed, which will put him in a good position to not have to play any of the big names before, the semi-finals. I think he's one to keep an eye on, particularly on those slower courts, because his movement is so good. He's obviously been off over the last couple of weeks to months, but we know what his best is capable of. He can match it with the top players, and he can match it with Novak in that best of 3 format. I think he's one to really keep an eye on. Just scrolling down the list, it was great to see Taylor Fritz find that form.
He's another good one.
Yeah, and it's probably selfish of me to kind of wish that he didn't produce that form throughout the whole hardcourt season, and to find value on him early in that clay season, because he did play well on the clay last year. But I think at home in North America on these slower hard courts will really represent a good position for him. To perhaps look at a couple of upsets over the next couple of weeks there. You've got a couple of dangerous floaters now. You've got the likes of Milos Raonic, who's probably going to be sitting outside the seeding or just within. Hubert Hurkacz. I think that there's a few there that Marin Cilic. There's a lot of people who, on their best, can produce some pretty quality tennis. But I think of the players that are perhaps underperformed to start the year, Medvedev's probably one, and Fritz is the other for me to keep an eye on. And I think if Dominic Thiem is fit, I think he's going to be very hard to beat again here. In his attempts to defend his title at Indian Wells from last year.
Yeah, Buddy King Curio said he likes Guerin. That's another clay player. I'm curious to see how it translates to some of these slower hard courts. I like that. That was a good note there. And then he also, his prediction. What do you think about this? One non-seed will win Miami or Indian Wells. I think he posted that while we were talking about the women's side, which there's always a great chance that there's a non-seed there. But maybe from the men's side, the more interesting question: can you see a non-seeded men's player winning either of those events?
That is a fantastic question. I need to double check off the top of my head how many seeds they actually have, because it's the longer draw, isn't it? That
as I'm starting to look at some of the rankings, so RBA is 12th in the world right now live. Is he going to be seeded? Is Rublev at 14 going to be seeded? Maybe even Khachanov. You've got the 2 young Russians there. Shapovalov hasn't played well, but again, you start to look at kind of those. They're 14, 15, and 16. You got Wawrinka at 17.
Yeah,
Guerin actually all the way up to 18. I think that's when you start to lose some of the seeds. FAA is 20th.
Yeah,
so that kind of group there.
I think we're rolling with 32 seeds here. So then you're kind of rolling further down to the likes of Riley Opelka, John Millman, Kyle Edmund, Sam Querrey.
Yeah.
I don't see it on the men's side, and you may be a lower seed potentially. I would have loved to have seen Alex de Minaur play on these courts fit, but he had a flare up of his abdominal injury on his return in Acapulco, and I'm not even sure if he'll be playing. I guess it fits into that, Auger Aliassime, Taylor Fritz as the kind of those lower seeds.
Maybe again Casper Ruud we mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty critical.
What do you think? Can your buddy Nick get it done? I mean, I know these are a little slow for his liking, but if he gets interested, maybe he comes out and has a fun time in Miami and plays well or something.
I don't even know if he's going to play with his wrist injury. That's the thing here. I don't see him. If his wrist is that bad, I just don't see him. He's that player that needs to be at 100% fitness. Because if he's not, then he starts to mentally waver a bit, and that's where he finds himself getting into a little bit of trouble. And we saw that. In Acapulco, he played and just played the one set, and off he went.
Now, what
there's
about one
another.
of my what about one of my favorite players, Tenny Songren? I know he had a really great Australian Open. Do you think maybe he can represent America well in either one of these events?
Yeah.
I don't like that. That's not a positive sound. It's okay to say no, but I
Oh,
didn't like that. Don't lie to me.
maybe that's a positive sound in Australia, and you just don't know.
It's not.
No, it's not. I don't think I can't see him making a very deep run. He's one of those tricky ones. You look at his ranking and you look at his performances at Grand Slams over the year. He's made quarterfinals, but he just can't seem to get that year-round consistency.
Yeah.
It's going to be very draw dependent, I think, for him. And another one in a similar rankings page that I'd love to see put together a really solid week is Tommy Paul. Things are starting to click. He had that brilliant win against Grigor Dimitrov at the Australian Open in 5 sets, and then struggled to back up against Fucsovics I think it was the next day or the day after. But also beat Zverev in Acapulco last week. I think he's one to keep an eye on, I guess, of the unseeded. But then it does probably drop off a little bit when we're talking about Masters 1000 quality and that top level. You've got players like Nishioka and Songer, and those players who are top 50 but perhaps just aren't quite producing that level that we need. Here's a comment here from the one away that I think Sandgren is a type of player that does bring his best at the bigger tournaments, and that's something we need to respect probably over the next fortnight over the next month with Indian Wells and Miami. But I think it's going to be very draw dependent for him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think again, once you start to get to these outer players, if we are assuming there's going to be 32 seeds and you're looking at rank 33 and higher, I think that a lot of this is draw dependent and try to get some luck. Like again, maybe somebody like Luca Pui, he's got a new coach, he's feeling good, it's all firing for some reason. It starts to get a little wonky. So I think definitely anybody that we're going to look outside of a seated position is very, very draw dependent.
Yeah, and that's the thing when we've got seeds going that deep, that's where things can get a little bit tricky when we're trying to find a winner here. But I guess the advantage of this compared to if we're thinking about a Grand Slam is we do have the best of 3. So in the men's side of things,
variance.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're playing best of 3 at the Australian Open, team would have beaten Djokovic in the final, but also Alex Bolt would have beaten team in the second round. So you can roll your way back through things like that, and you never quite know what's with that extra variety, and maybe that is what does separate the ATP from WTA at the moment in terms of that variety in winners. But yeah, looking at the players that we have on offer here, it's very hard to kind of look beyond kind of the top 10 and then maybe a sprinkling of others depending on the draw.
Yeah, and the men's side, it's really tough. So you'd have to have somebody again who's popping and having a really good week, and like you said, just got a nice wide open draw. So from the men's side, it's tougher for me. And then again, circling back to the women's side, now that I know it's kind of like 33 and above. Again, it's the WTA. You have some interesting names there. Maybe Sloane Stephens finds good tennis for some reason. She's 37. She won't be seeded. Julia Gorgas won't be seeded. Veronika Kudermetova, Lena Ostapenko, Sevastova is not going to be seeded. Peterson may or may not. I mean, Jennifer Brady is not going to be seeded, it looks like. So you've got some interesting names. Again, Buskova, Azarenka. Unless something goofy happens this week, they're all not going to be seeded. So I think the women's side is obviously more likely to produce kind of an upset victory in one of these tournaments. But I think that comes as to us as a surprise to no one.
And that is what we love about WTA, that a lot of people don't like.
It's the best.
But each to their own.
They're idiots.
Yeah, and this is why we're talking about it. And
I don't know if people's opinions are necessarily wrong, but if you don't like the WTA, your opinion is wrong.
I mean, yeah, we're just a small thing, and as we said before, we're not doing any dodgy advertisements about anything.
No. And if you want to fight with me
So
about whether the WTA is better than the ATP, my handle is right here somewhere on the screen or something. Get
yeah,
at me.
and King Curios, we will take this offline here with your
Yeah,
WTA
ew,
claim.
you.
Yeah,
It's mom, not mum, you idiot.
yeah. Alrighty. Well, we might just have a bit of a chat to wrap things up. If anyone has any questions that are listening, feel free to pop them through now.
There
Otherwise, we
was
might wrap up shortly.
one
Was there
a
one
little bit
about
back on handicapping. I'm trying to find it. There's a question
Patrick?
around hold, break, or
Here we go.
points versus
It's
games or something.
up on the screen. Is it better to look at
Ah,
break,
beautiful.
hold points, or games?
I like games, and I think that when you start to look at points, and this is totally subjective at this point, I think that there's a lot of good things about points, a lot of good things about games. I know that a lot of really
Hmm.
smart people, Dan Weston specifically is the name that comes to mind first. He uses
Yep.
points. I like games. I think that it's unfair to compare a point at 0-0 and give that the same weighting as a point at 40-40 or a break point or
Hmm.
something like that. But whereas games, it's a little more of a complete number for me, in that I think there is some sort of mental bridge or gap or something that you have to get through to actually win a game versus just to win a point. So personally, I like to use the hold break statistic for games rather than points. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one in that it can sometimes be looked into a little too much when you look at breakpoints one and breakpoint conversion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would love it to be easily broken down. Um, at the moment we just see how many breakpoints someone saved, and some people look at, oh, someone saved 9 out of 9 breakpoints for the match.
Yeah.
If they've all come in one service game and every other time they've held to love, I wouldn't give that as much weight, as perhaps if they, I'd say that they're serving quite well then compared to if they faced one break point in 9 consecutive service games, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I guess I would like to look more at, and, I'd love, and if anyone's out there that wants to try and figure out a way to get this a little bit more accessible, looking at, again, someone could be 0 for 4 on breakpoint saves, but all those breakpoints came at love 40, and actually they have actually given up 12 breakpoint opportunities to their opponents. They haven't come in singular points. So I think it's something that, again, we look maybe too much on the surface at what's available and easily accessible for us.
Yeah.
But I'd love to look at, games held to juice and games held to 30, compared to love. And, are players consistently struggling to hold serve, or, it's perhaps not as close. And I guess the biggest example I guess I can give of this is in my preview, and, I will do this data searching for particular matches when they come up. My best example I can give is from my preview of Monfils versus Djokovic last week. Looking at their ATP Cup match, Djokovic broke Monfils 3 times, so he converted 3 of 3 opportunities across 3 different service games. Monfils didn't break serve, but he actually generated, I think it was 7 break points across 5 different Djokovic service games. So I found that to carry a little bit more weight, that perhaps Monfils was starting to figure things out early on, but then once Novak was able to break Monfils, that the floodgates kind of opened a little bit. I think it's something that, if it were possible to kind of access a little bit more comfortably, and not have to do a whole lot of manual searching and data input, I think there is a lot of value there in tracking the stats a little bit differently. But at the moment, it's what we're given, and had you asked me a couple of years ago whether point by point of flash score would have been fantastic, I would have taken that as well. So things are evolving, but these are the things you need to look into and try and find to gain an edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Circling back to what you were talking about, the breakpoint thing specifically is something I hate looking at breakpoint statistics.
Yeah.
because you've got stuff like that. Like, say for example, somebody is zero love in multiple games during a set, and you
Hmm.
could look afterwards and be like, oh well, they saved like 10 out of 12 break points. Like, I don't give a crap. They still got broken twice. Like,
Yep.
it's really what I start to look at. So when you get into the points, and again, I don't want to take anything back. It's a really useful data point. It's something to look at. I think that when you're thinking about data points, I think it is good to try to put context around what's better and what's worse, but it doesn't mean that it's invaluable. Go back, take a look at that stuff, and as you're starting to go through matches, like you said, it takes some manual work. It's tough to find a data service that allows you to see points to 30, love, all that stuff. But go back and look at some big matches and try to pull up the flash score, look set by set, see how the points went back and forth. It's something
Yeah.
that's really big, especially if you don't have the time to watch. It's something I do a lot. I'll get up in the morning, and if some matches look weird, I'll actually pull up flash score and click on set one and like, okay, let's see how you know get a feel for maybe how the match looks. So a lot of value in both. But definitely more of a fan of game statistics versus points.
Yeah, and I think it does depend a little bit on when you look through. There are so many different styles and approaches that you can adopt when you're trying to find value in these you know in any sport. And there are a lot of people who will put models together to kind of generate value. And for I think models are great in a lot of instances, but you want to be modeling the right data and have the right inputs. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of digging yourself into a hole trying to find where to go with it. I think so. I'm probably more. There are some people who use purely data and they're driven a lot by data. There are a lot of people who don't use stats at all and look more situation, based on, fatigue and whatever else. I'd probably say I probably sit in the middle and kind of use a little bit of both. But I know that there are some people who, who do just base their judgments more so on a feel. And, I think, and as we're kind of talking about it now, in the comments, we've got King Kyrgios who, is there an option to use neither? Because he uses neither. I think everyone has their different approach, and I think if you can find those edges, and this is thinking long term, if you think you have that feel for the game and you can find those situational spots, it's going to work really well in the long run. Because I think as tennis evolves and as sport evolves and as data and analytics progresses in tennis, there are going to be a lot of, that's going to be where you can find your edge, I guess, away from other people, is if you can put the time into find these stats that you think might be helpful and, put things into practice and, try and find where your spots are. I think you're going to be better off in the long run. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I like what you talked about, but I also think that tennis is at this point, and like we talked about, a lot of the tennis data is not great. So, using just a database approach, you miss out a ton of stuff. Like you said, there's gambling and betting on sports is all about finding things that aren't incorporated in the market. So, if data is widely available to everyone, that's built into the number already for the most
Yep.
part. How it's built in might be a little different from person to person, but things like fatigue, things like, frankly, a player's birthday, or their travel schedule, that's all the stuff that you really start to put together to give you edges.
Mm-hmm.
But, from a data
Yep.
perspective, King Curious is talking about people who use just numbers in tennis suffer. I agree with that. I really do. You need to be, if not watching matches, paying attention to players' form, who they beat, how they beat them, how it went. Tennis is really interesting in that it's one person against one person. So you have a lot of mental factors, where
Mm-hmm.
in team sports, all that stuff kind of washes out over both teams a little bit, where at one person versus one person, it can be very impactful if someone's not feeling their best that day. And there's
Yep.
there's a lot of context you can put around stuff. So if you are a data person, make sure that you're finding ways to adjust for competition faced, adjust for players faced, or try to even categorize your players in terms of playing style. You look at numbers for two players. One might have a hold break of 105, and the other might have a hold break of 100. But the player with a hold break of 100 is like a 19-year-old kid who hits the ball 8 million miles an hour, and the player with 105 is somebody who's 35, 40 years old on their third week of traveling all over to different countries, and can't handle somebody hitting the ball that hard. You're going to look at your little
Yep.
model and you're going to be like, great, give me the person at 108, and the rest of us are going to look at it and go, horrible fatigue spot. This is a younger player that doesn't have a chance to sort of catch up numbers wise. And
Yeah.
it's hard to put all that context around. There's so much variability in that stuff. And again, just like King Curios is saying, data really it should be a guideline. The way I use it is almost more of a power ranking really than a true model. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. Tennis is kind of a special sport in that you have to watch it. You have to pay attention to it. But at the same time, that's why there's edges. That's why this stuff is attackable, and we're able to find little ways to make profit here and there.
Yep, definitely. Now, a couple more questions have come through, and this is probably more a comment, which we can turn into a question from the one away. So I noticed you guys will leave a game alone if you have missing info. I guess from my perspective, and this is something that I've probably evolved with over time a little bit, where, a lot of the work that I've done in the past years is looking at those kind of situational spots. And when you're looking at situational spots, be it fatigue or injury or, altitude or, whatever it is that you're kind of tying into the equation, I think, there is an inherent risk with that. And it's probably something that I've tried to kind of tighten up on a little bit, and find the right particular spots. If you have missing info, it just, the confidence in your selection is obviously going to change. You can speculate, and those who are good at speculating and trying to fill in those gaps will be able to kind of find those spots really quite well. But I think it's it depends a little bit on your style, and it's probably something that, and this is kind of stepping away from just personally making a selection and going to, sending a selection out to, sending a selection out to a number of people. So all of a sudden, it's not just you speculating personally, you're speculating and providing that information to people. I've personally tried to tighten that gap up a little bit compared to I guess previous years, where you can assume in some instances, but it's not always going to come out in a positive position.
Yeah, when I saw this question, I was thinking about it kind of two ways. Number one, a match where it's going to be two players that we don't know. I think that just maybe in general to take a step back, if you're making any decisions in your life, especially ones where you're backing with capital, if you don't know what's going on, you shouldn't really be involved. That said, there's a lot of times you can make bets only knowing one player versus not knowing another. So there's a little bit of variability to that. And then the second part would be, we leave a lot of matches alone because we kind of have hunches around information that maybe we haven't gotten yet. The Anisimova match last week, I think, was a big example of this.
Yeah.
We kept looking at her line, and people were betting the other side of it, and it started at a really low favorite price and just kept coming down and down and down and down. And it turns out she was sick. And I really believe that some people out there got word of that or knew somehow or something was going on. So I think just in general, unless you're a really confident person and you're able to do this kind of stuff, which I'm not, but if I don't have information, it's never a bad idea not to make a bet. It's always fine to stay on the sidelines. There's plenty of other stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with tennis, and it is. You've got so many matches each day that you can go through, and you know what? If I wanted to, I could find a spot on every match at every level, and look at that and see does that higher volume approach work in the long run, as opposed to kind of picking and being a bit more selective. And there probably would be quite a time component with that. But if you can do the research and look into things, I could quite happily pick a side or pick a total for every match that there is. But then it's figuring out that where you feel you have your edge overall. And I think that's the thing that probably more so those who are a bit more data driven can find more matches across a slate. But I think that it's not like it's NFL or it's something where it's once a week that we're getting a lot of matches. It's it's a day in, day out thing, basically from January 1 through till kind of early December, that you have a lot of opportunities there, and you don't need to feel like you need to jump into everything just because it's there. I think that's the sign that you're either panicking and trying to find yourself into kind of tipping form, more than anything. But if there's interest in there in terms of tipping everything, then by all means I could pick something for every match. But finding confidence levels and comparing matches to matches would then become tricky from a unit and a staking perspective. Because I think that's the thing. If you know you're going to be stronger in terms of your confidence level for some things, then it will make it a little bit more difficult when you're betting across the entire board.
Yeah, it's the way I always describe betting and betting profitably is we're trying to find situations where flipping weighted coins, and the more coins you flip, the harder it is to find ones that are weighted. And if you're going in without enough information, it's hard for you to tell if you have a real advantage. So I think that again, it's always better to be careful, and unless you feel really great about a bet, walk away from it.
Yeah, I thought I was flipping a really well-weighted coin when I took Monfils last week. I really did.
You did? Oh, come on. For
I
the
really
price, you had
did.
a great chance.
No, I know.
To have several match points, was he plus 600 or something? Come on.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Stop your whining.
No, it's not whining. It's just reflecting.
Feels pretty whiny.
I think that's. I've only brought it up 4 times. If we can just, it's only 4. Yeah. Look, it's again, that's playing that game overall. Stop pulling faces. I think it's that thing overall of backing yourself, and finding those spots. And I guess where I play things a little bit differently to others, and it's something I've had to explain for people who do follow along, is that my 0.5 to 5 unit staking is based on perception of value as opposed to probability of victory. And I've only played 1 5-unit selection for the year, and it was team to beat Nadal at the Australian Open. And I received a lot of messages before that match unfolded.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot before. Which you know what, I prefer receiving the messages before than waiting until they lose and then receiving them after. But I received a lot of messages beforehand because there was that a little bit confusion of like, how can you be so confident that he's going to win? And it wasn't that I was confident that he was going to win. It was just that his price was such good value given the circumstances and given how Nadal looked late in that match against Kyrgios, that on that slower hard court over best of 5 set tennis, that was just the value price on that particular match.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk sometimes around some of the math basics of gambling, but as crazy as it sounds, you can have a 5-unit play, a max play based on your system, and have a model that only tells you there's a 35-40% chance that player is going to win. Yeah. Because they might be priced at 10% or 15%. I mean, that's a huge, huge edge. So it's hard to wrap your head around that. And I think you're right. That's a great example. To have a max bet on somebody at that price is kind of odd for a lot of people. They get tricked by that fallacy of big favorites or more value than big underdogs. And that's not how it works.
Yeah. And I think that's also a comfort level with, it's not necessarily variance, but you're going to have bigger swings when you're playing, I guess, that value game as opposed to playing the kind of cumulative, smaller odds selection. So, it's a thing I can look at the end of February and go, well, I was actually, I think it was 13 units up or something for the month. But when you go back and break down that, there are a couple of swings there that, that generally you think over a longer period of time that they will even out, but across the month, Monfils wins, and that's an extra 21 units. I think ADF was playing Gurin earlier in that day, and that was another 9-unit swing there. So they will even out, or you like to think they will even out to an extent over the longer run. But I think it's that having that comfort level with your selection and your staking that and a lot of the times that I'll sit there and go, what, if my player loses, love 6, it's, I can sit here and go, what, I was happy with that play at that price for the match. And what was, I'm obviously not going to be thrilled if they lose love 6, but I think it's that acceptance and getting yourself into that position that you're staking correctly. You don't feel like I overstaked or understaked, and you're in that good position to kind of, I guess, build that consistency. And I think that is something that can be a little bit tougher with tennis. And when you look at other sports like NBA and things that are year round, and you don't have a week to cool off and think about it and go, what am I going to do next? You've literally presented with 50 opportunities the next day, and you go, well, am I going to play anything? Am I going to play nothing? Am I going to how am I going to approach it, and how am I going to manage those swings?
Yeah, I think that's great. And It looks like our buddy here, the one away, is talking about this. He's learning that a little bit. So I think that'll be
Yeah.
a good idea. Maybe we'll put that on our to-do list. Do a little
Yep.
breakdown of gambling math for the people. Try to put together some examples since they figured out how to put up those nice little screens. That
Yeah,
was,
I
that
know.
was really pretty. I'm really proud of you.
I
Spread
told you
can't do any of that stuff.
I'm very slowly developing. I'm trying to
Oh
make it look
boy.
semi-professional. Like I said, we don't have any sponsors or anything that we can plug, so we're just going to have to
Make do with what we
figure out
got,
what we
folks.
can do. Yeah.
If you know any sponsors, if anybody is watching, has a company that wants your banner up here somewhere, maybe this little guy down here, we could sell that. But I think we can even put a logo in like the top corner. You had like a tennis ball up there.
While we're playing this game, hang on, let me go top right-hand corner. 3, 2, 1. There we go.
Oh, look at that!
Look at that.
Look, folks. I mean, come on, your logo right
up there.
There. It's so hard to do that. But
yeah.
All right, that's enough panhandling.
Yeah, no, that'll do for now. But yeah, if anyone does want to, then feel free to get in touch, and hopefully we can make this thing a little bit bigger. And I think this is something that obviously yourself and the guys at Net Worth and what things that we've tried to do this year that are a little bit different. I think sending out a lot of written text is fantastic, but I think sometimes you lose that ability to kind of talk through things and discuss things back and forth a little bit more. So hopefully it's something we can do a little bit more as we kind of progress across this year. And trying to do a little bit more work with this. And so this is obviously live on Periscope, but it's also live on YouTube. So we've set up a YouTube channel called Ace Previews. And
we're on the YouTube?
I've
never been on the YouTube.
And I have 7 subscribers. Don't be jealous. 7. I mean, one of them's me, but so it's really 6.
You didn't have to say that.
That's fine. Well, King Curios was the first, so there we go.
That's all that matters. As long as we got the king, baby.
We always remember King Curios. You always remember your first, so thank you. Actually, I think the first was me. You might have been second. So look, we're going to try and do some things a little bit differently this year. As we saw before, as I said, I can just add in some fancy little graphics like this, and we pop off to the side. It's all happening. So stay tuned for that over the rest of this year and beyond. But I think we've chatted for over an hour and a half here and covered things off, I think, pretty well, considering there's not a significant amount of tennis compared to some other weeks. So thank you very much for joining me again today, Noops. And what time is it over there now?
It's a pleasure to join you. It's only about 10 o'clock. Go downstairs, maybe have one more drink, watch a little TV. The Sixers aren't playing tonight, which is nice, so I don't have to be arbitrarily mad about that. It was an awfully weird night in the association. But maybe we'll save that for the off season. We'll have a surprise basketball podcast.
Sounds like a plan. Well, I do follow basketball in my spare time, so I think while we were
You're a follower of the association.
Yeah. My Miami Heat had a good win against the Bucks, so
that's right.
We'll get to that at a later point. I think there's enough to talk about with tennis. So thanks to everyone who has joined us at some point along here or who's listening back to the replay. If you have any questions or if you have any ideas of things we could talk about in the future, do let us know. If you did like what you've seen or you've listened to, if you could give us a retweet or a quoted tweet shout out or something on Twitter just to kind of raise a bit of awareness, that'd be fantastic. The more people that get involved, the more questions we can answer and get people a part of it. And we're obviously going to keep trying some different ways to get involved, be it these discussions or maybe some watch alongs, or we can get the live scores up on the screen and we can kind of talk through as we go along. We can come up with, as I said, we've got lots of things we can do with these screens now. So if you do think of anything, do let us know. Make sure you're following us both on Twitter. So I'm at ace_previews. Noops is now, it's at underscore Noops. The underscore is at the start.
It's very sneaky. There's another Noops. He's some random guy. I don't know. He won't respond to any of my DMs. He quit using Twitter, and Twitter won't just give me his @
Yeah, that's poor. We're going to need to do something about that. But yeah, if you do have any questions, just let us know, and we can do our best to answer them. And we will chat to you next time.
Au revoir.